I stared at the document in my hands, the words blurring through my tears. My mother-in-law's signature where mine should have been. The beneficiary line that erased my children's future. That's when I knew someone had stolen more than just my husband from me. My name is Amanda Foster. I'm 34 years old, and until 3 months ago, I thought I understood what family meant. I lived in Savannah, Georgia, with my husband James and our 6-year-old twin boys, Ethan and Noah. We had the kind of life that made other people envious, a beautiful historic home, successful careers, and what I thought was a rock-solid marriage. James worked as a financial advisor at one of those firms with 3 names on the door. He was good at his job, meticulous with details, and always planning. I ran a small bookshop downtown that barely broke even but kept me connected to my passion for literature. We weren't rich, but we were comfortable, and we had plans. That all changed on a rainy Tuesday in April when a state trooper appeared at my door. James's car had hydroplaned on the highway. He died instantly, they said, as if that was supposed to be comforting. Before I share more of this story, tell me where you're watching from in the comments. Also, hit that like button if you want to hear more true family betrayal tales. The next few weeks passed in a blur of funeral arrangements, casseroles from neighbors, and trying to explain death to 2 confused little boys who kept asking when Daddy was coming home. James's mother, Carol, moved in temporarily to help. At first, I was grateful. Carol had always been involved in our lives, sometimes too involved, but now I needed all the support I could get. Carol was in her late 50s, perfectly coiffed at all times with that southern charm that hid steel underneath. She had been widowed herself when James was a teenager. She never remarried, focusing instead on her only son, her pride and joy. James used to joke that his mom would have kept him living at home forever if he hadn't put his foot down and moved out for college. I should have noticed something was off about her from the start. While I could barely function, Carol was eerily composed, efficiently handling funeral details and making phone calls. I chalked it up to her having been through loss before, but now I wonder if she was acting. It was about 3 weeks after the funeral when I finally forced myself to deal with the practical matters. James and I had always been responsible. We had wills, life insurance policies, everything in order. The life insurance was large enough to pay off our mortgage and provide for the boys' education. It was meant to be our safety net. I called the insurance company, expecting a straightforward process. Instead, I got confused. According to their records, I wasn't the beneficiary of James's policy. Carol was. There must be some mistake, I told the representative. My husband and I set this up together 5 years ago when the twins were born. The woman on the phone was sympathetic but firm. The policy was updated 8 months ago, Mrs. Foster. The beneficiary was changed to Carol Foster with your husband's signature and notarization. I confronted Carol that evening after the boys were in bed. She sat at my kitchen table, sipping tea as if we were discussing the weather. It's what James wanted, she said, her voice gentle but her eyes hard. He was concerned about your spending habits, dear. He wanted me to manage the money for the boys. I was stunned. My spending habits, I run our household budget, I'm the cautious one. She patted my hand in a way that made my skin crawl. He was worried you would waste it on that little bookshop of yours. It's sweet, but we both know it's a money pit. Something cold settled in my stomach. James had always supported my bookshop. He called it my happiness project and never once complained about it. And he would never, ever have changed something so important without telling me. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the signature on that policy change. James was meticulous about financial matters. It was his job. He wouldn't have changed our carefully laid plans without discussing them. And he certainly wouldn't have cut me out of decisions about our children's future. The next morning, I waited until Carol took the boys to the playground, then went straight to our bedroom safe. James kept copies of all important documents there. My hands trembled as I entered the combination. Inside, underneath our passports and birth certificates, I found a folder labeled Insurance. There it was, our original policy, with me listed as the primary beneficiary. But that wasn't all I found. There was a second policy I'd never seen before, taken out just last year, with Carol as the beneficiary. Two signatures that were supposedly from the same person, but when I laid them side by side, the differences were subtle yet unmistakable. Someone had been forging my husband's signature. I replaced everything exactly as I'd found it and closed the safe. My mind was racing. If Carol had forged James's signature to change the beneficiary on our original policy, that was fraud. But why would she do that? James was her only son, and she was already comfortable financially from her own husband's estate. I decided I needed to dig deeper before confronting her again. I started with James's home office, which I had avoided since his death. Each item I touched brought fresh waves of grief, but I forced myself to be methodical. I checked his computer first, but found it had been wiped clean. Strange, James kept everything. Next, I went through his desk drawers. In the very back of the bottom drawer, taped underneath, I found a small key I didn't recognize. It wasn't labeled, but it looked like it might fit a safe deposit box. Before I could contemplate what it might open, I heard Carol's car in the driveway. I quickly put everything back and slipped the key into my pocket. That night, after Carol went to bed, I returned to James's office and did a more thorough search. In his filing cabinet, behind folders of tax documents, I found a stack of letters bound with a rubber band. My heart stopped when I saw the first one. It was addressed to my darling in handwriting I recognized as Carol's. I shouldn't have read them. Part of me wishes I never had, but once I started, I couldn't stop. The letters span the last 2 years. They started innocently enough, motherly at first glance, but with undertones that made me uncomfortable. As I continued reading, the content became increasingly inappropriate. Carol wrote about dreams she'd had about James, memories of holding him as a baby, and then descriptions of intimacy that made me physically ill. These weren't the fantasies of a disturbed mind. James had responded. There were emails printed out, texts screenshotted, a relationship that crossed every boundary imaginable. I ran to the bathroom and vomited until there was nothing left. How could James have done this? With his own mother? What kind of nightmare had I been living in without knowing? When I could finally think again, questions flooded my mind. Had their relationship been going on during our entire marriage? Did James ever really love me? Were the twins a cover for his secret life? I barely slept that night. The next morning, I went through the motions of breakfast and getting the boys ready for preschool, all while avoiding Carol's eyes. I couldn't look at her without seeing those letters, without imagining her with my husband. I needed more evidence before deciding what to do. After dropping the boys off at school, I told Carol I was going to the bookshop, but instead parked down the street and watched our house. Sure enough, 20 minutes later, she left too. I followed her to a storage facility across town. She entered a code at the gate and disappeared inside. I waited until she left, about 30 minutes later, then approached the facility myself. I had no way of getting in, but I took note of the name and location. Another piece of the puzzle. That afternoon, I called the bank where James and I kept our safe deposit box. Using his death certificate, I gained access to it, but found nothing unusual inside, our important documents and some family jewelry. The key I'd found didn't fit this box. I needed help, but I had to be careful whom I trusted. James's best friend, Daniel, had always been kind to me. He and James had worked at the same firm until Daniel left for a competitor 2 years ago. Their friendship had cooled after that, which James attributed to professional rivalry. I called Daniel and asked if we could meet for coffee. When I saw him at the cafe, his face showed genuine grief. "Amanda, I'm so sorry. I wanted to come to the funeral, but..." "But what?" I asked. Daniel looked down at his coffee. "Carol told me you wanted it to be family only." Another lie. I'd wondered why more of James's friends hadn't attended. "Daniel, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Did you ever notice anything strange about James's relationship with his mother?" His face told me everything before he even spoke. "You found out," he said quietly. My heart sank. "How long have you known?" I suspected something for years, but I only confirmed it 2 years ago. That's why I left the firm. I couldn't face him every day knowing. Why didn't you tell me? I whispered. I confronted James. He swore it was over, that it had been a mistake. He said he'd get help, therapy. I believed him. I thought he'd ended it. But he hadn't. The letters proved that. Daniel reached across the table and took my hand. There's more, Amanda. About a month before he died, James called me. He was distraught. He said Carol was threatening him, that she had something on him that could ruin his life, his relationship with you and the boys. Did he say what it was? Daniel shook his head. He was going to meet me the day after he died. I think he was finally going to tell me everything. My mind was spinning. Was James's death really an accident? The thought that had been lurking in the back of my mind suddenly seemed horribly possible. I told Daniel about the insurance policy, the forged signature, and the storage facility. He agreed to help me investigate further. For the first time since finding those letters, I felt less alone. When I returned home, Carol was in the kitchen cooking dinner. She looked up and smiled, and I forced myself to smile back. The boys are playing in the yard, she said. I was thinking we should talk about the future, dear, about you and the boys moving in with me. I nearly dropped the glass I was holding. Moving in with you? We're not going anywhere, Carol. This is our home. She sighed as if I were being difficult. Amanda, be practical. You can't afford this house on your bookstore income, and the boys need stability. We have stability, and the life insurance will be managed carefully, she interrupted. For their future, James has entrusted me with that responsibility. I wanted to scream that she was lying, that she had somehow manipulated or coerced my husband, that she might even have killed him. But I kept my face neutral. I'll think about it, I said. Later that week, while Carol took the boys to their swimming lesson, Daniel helped me search the house more thoroughly. In Carol's guest room, hidden in her suitcase, we found a small locked box. The key from James's desk fit perfectly. Inside was a burner phone, a USB drive, and a positive pregnancy test dated 3 months before James's death. My hands shook as Daniel plugged the USB drive into his laptop. It contained videos, dozens of them. James and Carol were together in ways that confirmed my worst fears. But there was something else. In the most recent videos, James looked drugged, barely conscious. She was drugging him, Daniel said, his voice tight with anger. Look at his eyes. The burner phone contained text messages between them. In the last exchanges, James was threatening to end their relationship and to confess everything to me. Carol's responses were increasingly desperate and then threatening. The final text, sent the night before his death. If I can't have you, no one will. The pregnancy test was the final, devastating piece of evidence. Carol had been pregnant with her own son's child. Had she terminated the pregnancy, given the baby up for adoption, or was she still pregnant now? The test was from 6 months ago. If she'd carried to term, she'd be due any day. I started watching Carol more closely. She didn't appear pregnant, but she had gained weight in recent months, which she attributed to stress eating after James's death. She wore loose clothing, and I noticed she took several medications daily. I enlisted Daniel's help again. He followed Carol one day when she claimed to be going shopping. Instead, she went to an obstetrician's office in a town 30 miles away. Everything was falling into place. Carol had been having an affair with her own son. When he threatened to end it and confess, she'd killed him, making it look like an accident. She'd forged documents to steal his insurance money, and now she was carrying his child, her own grandchild, and planning to take my children as well. I needed to be smart about this. If I accused her directly, she might flee with her evidence, or worse, she might harm me or the boys. I needed indisputable proof that would stand up in court. Daniel suggested hiring a private investigator, but I was worried about bringing in someone else. Instead, I decided to set a trap. I began acting depressed and defeated. I told Carol I was considering her offer to move in with her. I asked for her help with the boys, claiming I was struggling to cope. I gave her what she wanted, control, while secretly building my case against her. I installed a small recording device in her room and another in the living room. I gained access to her email by borrowing her tablet when she was asleep. I found correspondence with the obstetrician confirming her pregnancy and emails to a lawyer about gaining custody of the twins after James's death. The final piece came when I found the name of the storage facility where she kept her unit. Daniel's brother worked in law enforcement, and though he couldn't get us a warrant, he advised us on what would constitute legally obtained evidence. Daniel and I went to the facility, and I claimed to be Carol, saying I had lost my key. The manager was reluctant until I showed him photos of Carol and me together with the boys, implying we were a couple who shared the unit. He issued me a new key. Inside the storage unit, we found the mother lode. Financial records showed Carol had been embezzling from James for years, medication that matched what would have been found in James's system if anyone had thought to check. A separate insurance policy on James's life had been taken out months before his death. And most damning of all, a detailed journal where Carol had documented her relationship with James since he was a teenager, her pregnancy, and her plan to cut me off and raise both her grandchildren, my twins and her unborn child, as her own. I photographed everything, then carefully put it all back. Daniel copied the journal entries, and we left everything exactly as we'd found it. With the evidence secured, I consulted a lawyer specializing in insurance fraud. She was horrified by what I showed her and immediately contacted the insurance company's fraud division and the police. The next step was the hardest, confronting Carol while wearing a wire. My lawyer advised against it, but I needed to hear her admit what she'd done. I needed to know why. I chose a moment when the boys were at school. I made coffee and sat across from her at the kitchen table, my heart pounding so hard I was sure she could hear it. "Carol, I know everything," I said calmly. She barely blinked. "What are you talking about, dear?" "I know about you and James. I found the letters, the videos." A flicker of something anger, crossed her face before her mask of concern returned. "Amanda, you're not well. Grief does terrible things to the mind." "I know about the pregnancy," I continued. "Your pregnancy with your son's child." Her hand trembled slightly as she set down her coffee cup. "You're being ridiculous. I've seen your medical records. I know you're due next month. I know you've been meeting with a lawyer to try to get custody of my boys. And I know you killed James when he threatened to expose your relationship." "You can't prove any of this," she said, her voice hardening. "Actually, I can. I found your storage unit, Carol. I've seen your journal. I know you've been drugging James for months and that you tampered with his car before the accident. I have it all." Her face transformed then, the mask of motherly concern falling away completely. What emerged was something cold and calculating. "He was mine before he was ever yours," she hissed. "You were a broodmare to give me grandchildren. James and I had something special, something you could never understand." "You abused your son," I said. "You manipulated him, drugged him." "I loved him," she shouted, slamming her hand on the table. "We loved each other, but he got weak at the end, started talking about getting help and ending it. He was going to destroy everything we'd built." "So you killed him." She leaned back, a strange smile on her face. "Prove it. No one will believe you. They'll think you're a grieving widow who's lost her mind. And when I'm done, I'll have my grandchildren, all 3 of them, and you'll have nothing." I stood up slowly. "It's already done, Carol. The police are on their way. The insurance fraud division has reopened its investigation. Your doctor has been subpoenaed. It's over." As if on cue, there was a knock at the door. Carol's eyes darted around like a trapped animal, but there was nowhere to run. The next few weeks were a blur of police statements, court appearances, and trying to shield my boys from the worst of it. Carol was arrested for insurance fraud, embezzlement, and eventually, after the evidence from her storage unit was properly processed, for James's murder. The investigation revealed that she had indeed tampered with his brakes and had been slowly poisoning him for months. The toxicology report from his autopsy had been incomplete, missing the subtle signs of long-term drugging. The district attorney believed she'd been planning his accident for some time, accelerating her timeline when he threatened to expose their relationship. Carol gave birth to a baby girl in prison. DNA tests confirmed James was the father. The baby was placed in foster care, and I faced the impossible decision of whether to seek custody of my husband's child with his mother, my children's half-sister and aunt simultaneously. In the end, I did, not because I had forgiven either James or Carol, but because that innocent child deserved better than the legacy her parents had created. The courts granted me custody, with Daniel serving as the baby's godfather. The insurance company reversed its decision, and both James's original policy and the fraudulent one Carol had taken out paid out to me and the children. The money didn't erase the pain or betrayal, but it provided security for 3 children who deserved better than the adults in their lives had given them. Carol was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. She still writes me letters sometimes, begging to see the children. I burn them without reading past the first line. As for James, I had his body exhumed and cremated. I scattered his ashes in a place only I know. I couldn't bear the thought of the boys visiting a grave, asking questions I never wanted to answer. Daniel has remained a steadfast friend through all of this. He helps with the children and never pushes for more than friendship. Perhaps someday that will change, but for now, I'm focused on healing, my own and my children's. The boys ask about their father sometimes. I tell them he loved them very much, which is the one truth I'm certain of in this whole sordid story. Someday, when they're old enough, I'll have to tell them something closer to the truth, but I'll never tell them everything. Some burdens shouldn't be passed down. The baby, whom I named Grace, is thriving. She looks like James but has none of Carol's features, a small mercy. The boys adore their little sister, and I've learned to separate her from the circumstances of her birth. She is innocent and blameless. There are still days when the betrayal cuts so deep I can barely breathe. Days when I question everything about my marriage, about the man I thought I knew. But then I look at my children, all 3 of them, and I know that whatever lies James and Carol lived, the love I have for these children is real. Carol thought she had taken everything from me, my husband, my financial security, potentially my children. Instead, she lost everything herself. Her son, her freedom, her grandchildren, and the child she bore in captivity. The wealth she tried to steal now provides for the very children she'll never see grow up. In her final attempt to control me even from prison, Carol tried to spread rumors in our community about my mental state, suggesting I had framed her out of jealousy. But the evidence was too overwhelming, and her own confession on tape too damning. The community rallied around me instead. My little bookshop became a haven again, with loyal customers ensuring its survival. I've even expanded, adding a children's section where I host readings every Saturday morning. The boys love helping, and baby Grace watches from her carrier, surrounded by stories much healthier than the one she was born into. I sometimes wonder what James would think of how everything turned out. Part of me hates him for his betrayal, for his weakness in succumbing to Carol's manipulation. Another part pities him, recognizing that her abuse likely began when he was too young to understand or resist. The hardest truth to accept was that I never really knew my husband at all. The man I married, had children with, built a life with, he was partly a fiction. Yet the love he showed our sons, I believe, was genuine. I have to believe that for their sake. In the end, Carol's obsession destroyed her, as it destroyed James. Her need to have him completely left her with nothing. And me, I'm slowly rebuilding from the ashes of a life I thought I understood. I've learned that family isn't always what it seems on the surface. The most dangerous predators sometimes hide behind the mask of maternal love. And that strength can come from the most devastating betrayals. The twins are in therapy, though they don't know the real reason why. They think it's to help them process their father's death, and in a way, it is. Grace will need therapy too when she's older. I'm in therapy myself, trying to understand how I missed the signs, how I can protect my children from secrets and lies. I keep a picture of James with the boys on their bedside table. Not for me, but for them. Whatever his flaws and sins, he was their father, and they deserve to remember the good parts of him. I've put away all pictures of Carol. When the boys ask about their grandmother, I tell them she's gone away and can't come back. It's the simplest truth I can offer. Some nights I still wake up in a cold sweat, remembering the moment I found those letters, the moment I realized the extent of the betrayal. But those nights are growing fewer. In their place is a quiet determination to create something better for my children. Carol thought she was stealing my future when she killed James and tried to take his insurance money. Instead, she handed me the keys to her own destruction. The evidence she so carefully preserved in her storage unit, the journal where she documented her crimes, these became the instruments of justice. The money that Carol thought would fund her new life with my children now ensures they'll never want for anything, including the therapy they'll need to process this legacy when they're old enough to learn the truth. I've changed my last name back to my maiden name and given it to Grace as well. The boys still carry their father's name, a connection to the man he was before his mother's corruption took hold. But Grace and I have made a fresh start, unburdened by the Foster legacy. Sometimes I visit Carol's prison, though I never go inside. I sit in the parking lot, looking at the high walls and barbed wire, knowing she's in there, alone with her obsessions. It's not about forgiveness, I'll never forgive her. It's about reminding myself that justice, however imperfect, was served. Daniel says I should stop these visits, that they keep me tethered to the past. He's probably right. But some part of me needs to see those walls, to know that the woman who tried to destroy my family can never touch us again. The last time I went, I brought Grace with me. She slept peacefully in her car seat, unaware of where we were or who was locked inside. I didn't go to torment Carol with what she'd lost. I'm not that cruel. I went to remind myself of what I'd saved. 3 innocent children who deserved better than the legacy Carol tried to create for them. As I drove away that day, I made a promise to myself and to my children. The cycle of secrets and lies ends with me. My children will grow up knowing they are loved purely, honestly, and without condition. They will never be pawns in someone else's obsession. Carol wanted to create a family built on lies and manipulation. Instead, she lost everything, while I found strength I never knew I had. She was James's shame. I made Grace our legacy. If this story inspired you to stand up for yourself, subscribe and turn on notifications. You never know whose story might help you next.